one of the issues in adult couples relationships is that people don't believe that their partner fully wants them. And she said, and that really goes back to, did your parents look at you like you were wanted as a child? And that's when it clicked.
You're listening to In Bed with Science, a sex podcast. I'm Leonoran, a sex therapist with a Master of Science in Sexology and over 12 years of coaching, counseling, and therapy experience. Today, I'm talking to counselor Bowen Marshall about neurodivergence and why sex can start to feel like a test. We're talking about masking and dopamine and insecure attachment styles and how they can turn sex and intimacy into performance for so many people with ADHD and autism. And just as Bowen themselves say, as soon as performance comes into the room, it's no longer sex. But first, do you have a sex or relationship question you want to ask, but you're not quite sure where to turn? Now's your chance. I'm looking for thoughtful, personal questions about things like intimacy, mismatched libidos, emotional disconnect, and struggles with sexual pleasure and desire. Specifically, those messy, non-Hollywood experiences that we all have but rarely talk about. And I'll be answering them in upcoming episodes of the podcast with both compassion and scientific insight. Submit your story or question anonymously or with your name if you'd like, and it might be featured in a future episode. Today's guest is actually someone my partner recommended to me. So when I saw their first reel on Instagram, I was hooked. And I was hooked by the way they take really complicated phenomena and break it down in a simple way, but without losing the nuance. And, you know, if you're on social media at all, you'll know that that's a pretty difficult task to do. Bowen Tyler Marshall is a licensed counselor in the state of Ohio, US. They specialize in working with neurodivergent, queer, people of color, and couples and polyamorous clients. Welcome to the podcast, Bowen.
Thanks, Lee.
I'd love to start by hearing how you got started as a therapist and really kind of focusing a lot on neurodivergence, because I find that fascinating.
So I originally got my counseling degree in 2011, and at the time, it just didn't feel like the field was ready for me. Queer, neurodivergent, person of color in the States. And so I ended up doing college administration, some philanthropic consulting, but during the pandemic, when everything shut down, I left my job. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to do in my next chapter, I had a friend that I graduated with who said, Bowen, have you kept your counseling license active? And I said, you know, I've always thought that I wanted to go back to it because I do feel like that's my calling. And as I said it, I was like, oh, it's now. And so I ended up joining a private practice that specialized in working with queer people.
Okay.
And because I have a PhD in the States, I'm able to do a lot of gender affirmation letters. So letters that allow people to get transitional surgeries that other practitioners, if they don't have that credential, can't offer. And so I started seeing a lot of people who were trans. And they would come to me for the letter, but then they would start talking about some of the issues they'd had with like gender issues and feelings that people did not accept them. And I would sit with them and go, yes, absolutely, you've got gender dysphoria. But I don't think that's the reason why you're not getting along in these social situations. And as I came to find out that there is, I think I've heard the number is a 75% overlap between female-to-male trans persons who seek therapy, and that's a few years out of date, between female-to-male trans persons and autism. And I was like, oh, I'm not competent. I need to skill up. So I did a lot of readings, a lot of trainings, and I ended up developing a special niche in autism. And of course, until 2013 in the States, I don't know internationally with the ICD when it was recognized, but until 2013, it was just assumed that if you had autism, you also had ADHD. And so I don't feel you can be a competent practitioner with queer people if you're not specialized in autism and ADHD, because you're going to see it again and again and again. And so I just kind of fell into this work. My dissertation was on parallel identity construction between LGBTQ practitioners on college campuses and their personal LGBTQ identity development. And one of the most interesting findings out of my study was that professional helping identities often lead the way to understanding personal identities. So we come in, I want to help other gay people, queer people. And then you hear all these stories about, oh, that's what gender dysphoria is. That's what non-binary means. Oh, I'm non-binary. And so in the course of treating all these people, I learned two things. I learned, oh, I'm non-binary too. So that's why I cry so much whenever something happens to a trans person. I'm like, am I appropriating their story? No, I'm part of that community. You're doing all these things. Wait, I'm doing all these things. Wait, getting a PhD doesn't exclude you from having ADHD. Holy shit, I have ADHD too. And so it's been this full circle piece that as I've treated people, I've also come to understand myself better. And it was at that connection that I realized I started looking online for resources, I think, as everyone does, because I don't think there's enough good training for practitioners around ADHD and autism. And I just wasn't finding anything. And I realized, and I don't know what it's like in Sweden or in Europe, but before the pandemic, we already had a severe lack of qualified mental health professionals. And after the pandemic, because of so much burnout, I think we're still looking at maybe half as many clinicians that are needed to treat this size of the population. And so I was just seeing all this terrible content that wasn't useful. And I think the New York Times came out with an article last year where they said 50% of postings on social media about ADHD were basically garbage.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, as opposed to ranting about this, do something. And so I started posting things, and it's just gained traction over time. And I have people reach out because I'm seeing things clinically and then able to share what people are going through. And I think people just don't feel alone then.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your content, obviously. That's why I reached out to you about the podcast. I think it's brilliant. I wanted to circle back to what you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about how you felt like counseling was your calling, because I feel like this is something a lot of therapists and counselors and just mental health professionals in general feel. How do you balance it feeling like your calling and also not burning out?
So I think with the way that capitalism has kind of stripped meaning out of jobs, not everyone can say this, but I really fall in line with the word vocation. That vocation is when your great talent meets the world's great need. And I think for me, because I have that calling, that vocation, the work in and of itself is restorative. I think people talk a lot about all of the misses. I've had clients who have completed suicide, and they will live in my heart forever. You always question yourself. What could I have done? Is there something I could have said? Did I not see the signs? But then there are all the people who get better. ADHD for me is incredibly rewarding work, because as you start shifting from there's something wrong with you, you're bad, to your brain just looks different and works differently. And we can find strategies to help you work with it. People's lives transform.
Yeah.
And the same is true with autism. When you take people out of environments that are making them sick, I think it was out in Flint, Michigan, there was this quote that said, you can't get better in environments that made you sick. Well, when you have autism, the world makes you sick so often, because we have things that are built not for human thriving, but on lowest cost manufacturing built, right? So why is it too expensive to have a door that closes and to have non-fluorescent lighting that doesn't trigger migraines? We can't afford that for individuals, but the billionaire who owns this building can afford another super yacht.
Yeah.
I think it's remembering the gratitude that I get to do this work, because not everyone gets to do meaningful work every day. And I choose to focus on the people who overwhelmingly get better alongside the people that will always be with me.
Yeah. And so these people that you help and that you treat and that get better, if we're focusing specifically on those kind of neurodivergent clients that you have, what would you say are some of the biggest relationship questions or difficulties that they come to you with?
Masculine trauma.
how does that show up? I mean, if someone's listening and they don't know what masking is, I mean, it's a pretty common term that's kind of thrown about on social media. But again, who knows how much justice we do to the term, really? How would you explain it?
And I have no idea if this translates into a podcast, but I'm going to tell a story and you can do with it what you want. I just figured out what attachment theory was. And I know that sounds so ridiculous. Like, who is this person who says they're a therapist that doesn't understand attachment theory? I understood the words. I understood about dysregulation, co-regulation, being able to as a child, being able to crawl over and touch your secure base, the parent not being, like, I've read the studies, I understand the concepts. And I would say all the words and people go like, oh yes, that's attachment theory. And I would think, damn, I was hoping you would say something that would add to what I was understanding. And then they would say all the big words back to me and I would go, I understand what those words mean, but there's something, they're not quite locking together. And I was watching, I can't remember her name, but she's brilliant. She's the therapist who does couples therapy on Showtime. And I love watching the way that she thinks about things. So she was doing an interview with Jay Shetty, and they were talking about one of the issues in adult couples relationships is that people don't believe that their partner fully wants them. And she said, and that really goes back to, did your parents look at you like you were wanted as a child? And that's when it clicked. I did not grow up with a secure attachment. I grew up with somewhat of an anxious, secure, maybe sometimes avoidant. And I think I don't know the rates on who grows up with secure attachment and who doesn't. I think far more people than we think don't grow up with secure attachments. But when you didn't grow up with it, you don't know the feeling. And that's what I was missing in attachment theory, that there's this way that my mom looks at me, even when she has made mistakes, even when she's been tired, burdened. I'm 39 and she still looks at me like, gosh, I'm just so glad that you came to me. I want you here. I'm so excited when I get to see you. It's a joy to have you in my life. And I always said to my friends, I am my mother's love. And they would say, oh, that makes sense. And I would say, yeah, the way that I'm able to love is because of the way she loved me. But I didn't connect with it. It's that she looked at me like I was wanted. And that makes more sense because you do have parents who do all of the right things, right? They buy the clothes, they make the food, they get their kids to all of the activities, but they look at their kids like, oh, why am I not having a glass of wine right now? Oh, you came 5 years too early. And it's just that look of, you are a burden despite the fact that I'm doing everything right.
Yeah.
And that's the basis of masking. We mask, in some ways, regardless of the activities our parents do, when they don't look at us like we're wanted.
Right.
And what we're trying to cultivate in all those moments, whether it's a well-meaning parent who's just stressed out, who doesn't really think about how they're looking at their child, whether it's a parent who is neurodivergent and maybe has flat affect and can't figure out how to look that way, has their own trauma and alexithymia and is afraid to look at their child in that way. And masking is this desperate attempt to get that look from our parents. And so we get into adult relationships where a person has pretzeled themselves into trying to do all the things to get people to look at them like they want them, to get approval, to be told they're good. And they mask kind of regardless of whether or not something feels good. I have ADHD, right? So I tried on 3 shirts this morning to make sure I had something that on my body felt good, so I wasn't distracted by that the entire time we're talking. But I was also taught at one point, like, for nice occasions like this, being interviewed by someone such as yourself, I should be wearing a shirt, like suit jacket and tie. But I would have been sweating under here. I would have, it would have felt itchy. I would have been like, people can't see me, but I would have been like, kind of like turning my body to get those fixes. That's a simple idea of masking, that I would have put on something that was uncomfortable to me, that would have been distracting me the entire time, and I wouldn't be able to focus on your questions. Now multiply that over every interaction you have with someone, and you have people who then don't know themselves. They don't know what they want. And they're so focused on getting that feeling, that look of you are wanted, that they actually don't develop a genuine connection with the person. Because a genuine connection with another person is each person saying what they like and don't like, and the other person trying to figure out if they can or cannot accommodate that.
Do you think that you more easily fall into masking in a relationship where you have one partner who's holistic and one partner who's neurodivergent, compared to a relationship where both people possibly are neurodivergent?
No, I think it depends on how I think it depends on how people were raised.
Yeah.
I think you can have an instance where people are very good at checking in on you because they're aware of how much they've had to mask. But I think it's older than that for people. I think it comes very early. And I think that masking is about just that terror that they won't be wanted.
Yeah.
And so I work with couples who, are I think it's a misunderstanding. ADHD hyperactive type can look very different than inattentive type. And so you can get the same criticisms you might get with inattentive ADHD and a neurotypical person, where it's like, you don't care about me. You commit to do these things and you never do them, which is all about disorganization and a lack of dopamine. I was watching Diary of a CEO, and they were talking about the profound effect that dopamine has on the brain. And they were saying that when they do, maybe you've seen this, the studies where they actually remove a rat's ability to produce dopamine. I don't know how they do it, it's magic. But if they put the food right in front of their mouth, they'll eat it. But if they put it a body length away, without dopamine, the rat will starve.
Oh, I think I've heard of this study. Yeah.
Because dopamine is such a powerful motivator. I also think that one of the analogies that I've come across that's been really helpful to help describe kind of regardless of the difference, and I think it's really just the difference. My brain works so much differently than yours. I can't imagine how you think that's different than mine. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. And so one of the analogies I started using is the hot stove analogy. Have you heard this?
No.
So in ADHD, and sometimes in autism, especially ADHD, asking someone to do a task that you seem simple, that you think is simple, is like asking them to put their hand on a hot stove. If I said, hey, Lee, go put your hand on that hot stove, and you looked at me, and I said, well, it's not hard. Like, do you not know how to raise your hand? Like, let me show you how to raise your hand. Okay. Do you know how to move it over the plate? Okay, just put your hand down. Well, of course you wouldn't do that, because everything in your brain is screaming, this is danger, this is wrong, don't do this. If you start understanding that when people are avoiding things, it's not willful. It's not because they want to. Many of the people I work with desperately want to be able to do things like get to their job on time, pick up their kids on time, make dinner, and clean up afterwards. And so if you start to think about it like that, there are kind of three things you can do to manage it. And I realize I'm tangenting, but I want to get back to this. The first is, if you can outsource it, do it. So I have my house cleaned every 2 weeks because that takes away the hot stove partially.
Yeah.
A lot of the hacks we see, so the second thing you can do is turn down the temperature on the hot stove. So if you know the stove's not hot, it's easy to put your hand in the burner, right? That's what a lot of hacks are. It's trying to find dopamine, make things feel like less of a hot stove in order to be able to execute on those tasks. But on things for which it's just going to be a hot stove no matter what, as opposed to saying to people, which I think happens in all kinds of pairings around neurodivergence where people are different, as opposed to saying, you're dumb, you're stupid, why can't you just do this, you're lazy, say to the person, hey, I know this is really hard. I know it feels incomprehensible. But my guess is you know how to do everything. It's just a chain of events that you're getting stuck somewhere. Hey, would you let me sit down with you and actually look at your calendar with you, so that we can start to see what your day looks like. And maybe together I can help you find where that sticking point is. And that's, I think, one of the most rewarding pieces is we think it's so simple. We think people should just be able to do these things. Getting out of bed is an incredibly complex task, right? You have to remember to have set your alarm. You have to locomote yourself, to put your feet on the ground. And then you have to do the entire chain of events that takes you from being, I sleep in boxers, but like takes you from being practically naked to being fully clothed and presentable to people. I mean, that is a complex series of tasks and a lot goes on.
Yeah.
And because we call it simple, because they're actions, people berate themselves as opposed to going, actually, let's honor this as a complex task and let's figure out where you get stuck. That helps get people to a place where they're not locked in by their diagnoses, by their disorders. Am I talking too much?
No, this is brilliant. I have so many things going on in my brain right now. I'm like, which one should I go with? But I was kind of thinking about what you were saying, just like the very simple idea of we have different brains. You function that way. I function this way. How it reminds me so much of my own relationship with my partner. We've been together over 10 years and we could not be more different. And I think the very fact that we are so different and have such different brains means that we've been way more lenient with one another because we know that we can just not relate to about 85% of what is going on for the other person. So there's no like, if you loved me, you would do this, or if you understood how much that meant to me, you would, because we know that that's not the way it works. Just a bit of a reflection from my side. When it comes to relationships and seeing couples, do you also deal with the sexual challenges that come along with having a diagnosis like ADHD and autism?
Absolutely. It's tied to everything.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting you would say. What would you say are the biggest challenges that people come to you with? I know, for instance, for me, it often a lot revolves around like sensory sensitivities and working with those things because that can trigger disgust and kind of shut down their arousal. But what does it look like for you?
So, do we have time for me to ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, as a sex therapist, as someone who is in a neurodivergent relationship, one of the things, and this kind of answers your question, one of the reasons people come to me is they've shifted out of limerence. You know, the first 2 years, you're attracted to someone who's different. And I find in the first couple of years, you're attracted to your idea of that person. But then 2 years hits, and what do I hear? Well, they're just unmanageable. They need to change. I'm wondering, because I think it's very rare, and it sounds like you've done this, that most of the time when people finally get to know their partner, they run away.
Mm.
Much rarer, and this is the reason why people come to me, is when they finally get to know their partner, they want to know more.
Mm.
How did you make that transition with your husband? How did you navigate going from your idea of him to actually knowing him and then being in the relationship?
That's an interesting question. I think from the very beginning, we just had so many conversations that, and it's going to sound pretentious, but I'll say it anyway. It was like, what does love mean to you? What does care mean to you, right? We had all of these discussions. I think people end up having way, way later in the relationship, but we somehow had at the beginning because we realized that we were kind of talking past one another. And I think that kind of allowed us to get to know each other faster in a way and to kind of hit those speed bumps faster and had to decide whether it was going to be worth it. And speaking for both of us then, I suppose, we both felt like it was worth it. And maybe part of it was that we were so different. Obviously, I'm a therapist, so I'm interested in people, and it's really interesting when someone's different, right, and understanding why they tick. But I think for him as well, he could so not relate to me that he was intrigued. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. And so I think we're getting at the reason why people come to me is that people come in with a lot of assumptions about the way that they think things should go in a relationship. And number one reason is they come in thinking the other person's the problem. Now, when we deal with trauma and sexual shame, there is this other feeling that I'm the problem. But it also gets interrelated with, well, but they're making too many demands. And to me, sex is an extension of everything. So, masking. One of the things that I really believe is that masking is a survival mechanism that's about fitting in. And fitting in is about taking other people's behaviors, putting them onto yourself, and being like, don't be suspicious. You know, just like that Broad City piece where it's like, I'm cutesy, I'm demure, I'm right here. I know I'm mixing a couple of memes there, but I don't want to stand out because if I stand out, I get struck down. Versus belonging, which is all about standing out, not in a jerkish way, not in a talking over people, but I'm going to stand out, be unique, and feel valued for that. And neurodivergent people don't get that. Their differences are not valued. They're shamed. And when you start to think that this big part of you, I always saw ADHD as this kind of shadow writer for me. I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse that I didn't get diagnosed until later in life. I never had the social stigma of having ADHD follow me through my developmental years, but gosh, it would have made a lot of things easier, right? But I think that's it. For me, it's often not the actual diagnoses or identities themselves. It's the social stigma that follows them. And what then happens to people's sense of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, all those three qualities is, well, there's something wrong with me, I'm bad. And then when we get to sex and what we want for sex, well, if I can't orgasm within 5 minutes, I'm bad. If I go limp because I can't maintain an erection because I've got so much anxiety up here, or I have a physiological issue like erectile dysfunction, I'm not a man. I can't please someone. And so it's all these expectations about how you thought things should go that I think are the reason why people come to couples therapy and more specifically start talking about sex.
So with these expectations, do you see expectations that are different for people with ADHD versus people who have autism? Or would you say that's not really what it has to do with?
What do you mean?
Like, do the expectations differ depending on diagnosis that we bring to sex? Like, would there be, for instance, for someone with ADHD, a fear of being too much that you bring to sex that maybe someone with autism wouldn't have?
I'd say being too much, being too particular is something that people who are very aware who have autism worry about a lot. Because they're cued into this idea that I do have some rigidity here. And there are things that I do like and things that I definitely don't like. And what if my partner can't do those things? I don't like the feeling of my stomach being touched. What if they graze my stomach during sex and it gives me the ick? And then it's over and I've killed the mood. Again, I don't think any of these things are this conscious, although that one was. I think for ADHD, a lot of what I hear is because of the hyperactive anxiety, because of the disorganization, I think it's Magnificent Sex, this group of researchers out of Canada, sought to define not just like what is normal sex, what is magnificent sex. And they did all this research and they found across populations, LGBTQ, straight, kink communities, older people, younger people, people with disabilities, that the kind of common definition of the best sex they'd experienced were seen. And this one guy was like, yeah, when you're in an orgy and you look over and you see two people and they are just so in it, that to get in between them to interrupt it would be the worst thing you could do because they're so locked in. I think ADHD robs us of presentism.
Yeah. I see that with a lot of clients too. The struggle to be present, to not have their mind focused or like stretched out in a million different places. We were talking before this interview about sex being kind of one of those few natural sources of dopamine. And I know you have a bit to share about that. Could you unpack a little how, like, if we even get really basic to begin with, like, what is dopamine? We've been talking about dopamine now, but what is it and how does it work in sex?
I do want to come back, but can we talk about the key distractions? And I would love to hear your thoughts with what you see in your clients. When we talk about key distractions, right? For people with ADHD and autism, first key distraction is I'm not good enough. So they come in, they're naked, they're in the space of wanting to have sex, and the first performance metric comes up. What if they think I'm not attractive enough? What if I'm too awkward? What if they don't like it? What if I don't know what to do? Then, for people with ADHD who have that difficulty switching between their task positive network and their default mode network, there's this flicker between, okay, I'm having sex. Wait, what was that thing I had to do yesterday? And so there are these layers and layers and layers that I think are neurodivergence, an example for someone who's autistic. Wait, no, I'm supposed to put the condom on before I put the lube. Shoot, I put the lube on first. And so there are all these things that cause disorganization that pull them out of the moment. And for me, right, following the come as you are model, it's not so much about desire. It's about all the breaks, the things that stop us from having sex. That ends up being the bulk of what I do. And the other thing I wanted to say in here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as soon as the word performance comes into a discussion about sex, I'm increasingly convinced that it's not sex anymore.
I agree with you completely.
I feel like performance is something that got made up probably long before, but by the Viagra Cialis commercials, where it's like, enhance your performance. Who am I performing for?
Yes. Oh my God. Completely. And let me tell you, working with people of all genders, I really, really feel like performance is a word that comes along with my male clients, way, way more than, for instance, female clients, that a lot of it is framed with the language of not only performance, but success. I was successful, or it was unsuccessful, or I failed. It's never about the missed connection, because of course it isn't, because at that point when they've come to me, it's not about the connection or missing the pleasure. It's about, I just need to get this right. I have to be right. I feel like that's a very kind of clear through line. I don't know if you've seen a difference between genders and that kind of language.
I have. I also see it when people have chronic pain issues. Right? My husband wants to have more sex, but I'm in chronic pain.
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with me that I still don't want it? And they go, no, you're in pain.
Yeah.
And right, I say, I think it's a good tagline. As soon as performance comes in, it's no longer sex, but people use the terms performance and success all the time. And so for me, it's getting really clear at what do they mean by success? What do they mean by performance? Because underneath that, what I'm constantly trying to get to is what feels good for you.
Yeah.
That may be the closest thing that I come to what is a metric. Does it feel good? Can you ask for it? Is the other person able to do that thing in that way that makes you feel good?
Yeah. And do you find then, because this is what I find at least for most of my clients, is they come to me more with the idea of like, I don't want this to happen. But when you ask them, what do you want to happen? What do you want to feel during sex? They don't really know. That's kind of almost blocked off, really.
Yeah, it's like an overwhelming test. It's like, you sent me a document to sign, and it was in, I think, Swedish.
Yeah, the instructions. I'm sorry.
No. But I think it's a good example of, I was like, this is so simple. It's got all the colored tabs. Figure figure it out, Marshall. That's my coaching term for him. I'm like, figure it out. You got this. Don't reach out to Leah and ask what's going on. But I think it's like if you asked me to talk and write about all of my favorite things, but you asked me to do it in Swedish, simplest test in the world, but I would fail. And I think that's when you ask someone who's masked their entire life for whatever reason to do the simple thing of what do you like, it's like giving them a test of their favorite things in a foreign language. What's your favorite color? If I don't know the words for color, I can't give you that answer. What's your favorite food? If I don't know the words for food, I can't give you that answer. What's your favorite movie? Oh. And so, again, we set up a condition where we say, well, it's so simple. Just know what you like. So you asked about dopamine. First and foremost, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that gives us pleasure, is also deeply involved in motivation. So without dopamine, we don't get stuff done. And one of the things that was really unlocked for me, because I couldn't figure out how I got so much done before I was medicated, because if you don't have dopamine, biochemically you cannot get stuff done. And also if you don't have the sidecar of norepinephrine to help you focus and give you an energy lift as well, you can't get stuff done. Well, what I learned was that for people who are quote unquote high masking or high functioning, their brain does this little trick where the reason why so many ER doctors, firefighters, police people have ADHD is because when stuff is going down, that's when our body releases adrenaline, and adrenaline causes our brains to dump dopamine and norepinephrine. And so if you can put yourself into a state of hyperarousal, of constantly feeling like this test is the thing that will mean I'm a success or failure in life, that people will judge me or not. If this person's opinion says more to me about how I feel about myself than I say to myself about how I feel about myself, then I will do it for them. One of the tricks we use in therapy for ADHD all the time is, if you want to get your house clean, invite someone over once a week.
Yeah.
You'll get more done in that 2 hours before they get there than you do the entire week because you're so fixated that this could make or break your relationship. If they see your ADHD doom piles, they're going to judge you. And so we get stuck in this cyclical pattern in order to function of figuring out ways to rip ourselves apart, not because we want to feel bad, but because to get that adrenaline release, the time is now. We got to get stuff done. It's do or die. It's life or death. Even though it's not life or death, we get stuck in a stress cycle. And that stress cycle, although functional, puts wear and tear on the brain. It's one of the reasons why untreated ADHD gets worse as people get older. One, because their working memory diminishes. And two, because when you're constantly locked in an adrenal production state, that just causes a lot of stress on the brain. You know, dopamine from sex happens after the fact. And one of the things that I kind of segment between kind of unnatural dopamine and natural dopamine is, for much of evolutionary human history, to get dopamine, there was a lot of upfront costs. So working out's an example. You get a lot of dopamine at the end of a workout that then lasts for hours. But to get to it, you've got to do a lot of lifting. The same is true when we think about sources of calories, right? The abundance of sugar in our environment didn't exist for our ancestors. They had to walk, they had to hunt, they had to climb trees and pick fruit to get a little bit. And I think the other interesting thing is pleasure, which is what dopamine impacts, and pain are tied in the brain. So when you get pleasure, think of like a scale, like pleasure, pain. When you get pleasure, it pushes the scale down, and your brain in response pushes pain down. And part of that's because, the reason why we constantly seek pleasure is, so you do all this work, you get the one piece of fruit. You can't sustain that. That's not enough calories. So your brain hops on the pain side and makes you go, okay, I need to find more. I need to pick 5 or 6 more of these. I also have people that I love. I need to pick some for them, right? Because we were in a constant state of deprivation, the brain is hyper cued in to seeking pleasure. And so we live in an environment of superordinate stimuli. Porn is abundant, sugar is abundant, alcohol is abundant. And sex, compared to all things, I think food and sex are the two most naturally abundant sources of dopamine. Sex is, in my mind, one of the most potent natural sources of dopamine. But it still can't compete against all these other things.
Mm.
I guess with your question with dopamine and sex, do you have a particular question about that? Like, is it the competition? I don't know.
The competition, I think, is really interesting. But I was also thinking if sex can be a way of regulation, I mean, for anyone really, but if we're thinking specifically of people with ADHD and we're talking about the dopamine connection as well, is there a risk when it comes to seeking dopamine through sex?
I think the greater risk is that there's so much more convenience to just watch porn and not, because like if you think about it, to get to a state with someone where you can have sex with them, where you want to have sex with them, you have to do a lot of work. I was working with this client who had ADHD. That wasn't the presenting issue. He thought that was well managed, and it was. Had ADHD, and he couldn't understand why he experienced so much sexual rejection, why people wouldn't have sex with him. You know, he would go out to the clubs, he would go dancing. He was like, is it because of my size? Is it because of how I look? I feel like my hair is thinning. He started to do all these things to tear his appearance apart. And I said, well, I guess a couple things. One, when you go to the bar, do you go to the bar to have sex, or do you go to dissociate from your problems and get super drunk? And he goes, oh, I have like 8 drinks. And I said, that's not sexy. And when I told him that people go to the bar for different reasons, some people go to not feel lonely, some people go to meet friends, some people go to be seen, right? I live in a city where it's a small enough gay community that like, oh, I'm at the bar, right? I'm wearing this and looking this way. And, you know, I'm a fixture in this gay community. Some people go to have sex. And I said, you know, that blew my mind when I realized people stop after a drink and a half because they want the positive benefits of alcohol, but not the depressive parts. And so when you're 8 drinks deep, and again, getting tons of dopamine, especially with ADHD calming the brain, when you're 8 drinks deep talking to someone who's a drink and a half, you're not attracted to them. So we talked about that, and I said, and when are you having sex? Because gay sex is messy, right? Are you having sex at the beginning of the night? Are you having sex at the end of the night? And he said, well, you know, people will message me and they ask me to come over, and I'm not ready. And I said, well, so are you not having sex because people don't want you? Or you're not having sex because you're too sloppy, which you can change, and you're not prepared to have sex because you're messy, right? Like dancing, if you've danced for 4 hours, gone out to a meal before, had drinks, I don't care how you slice it, you probably need to douche. You at least need a wet wipe, right? You probably need to take a shower. And I said, and we live in America where everyone's 20 to 30 minutes away from each other. So if it's 2 a.m, are you even awake? Or do you like, I don't know if you've had those instances, but I definitely have those nights where I wake up from my Uber and I've fallen asleep on the way home. And I said, so I wonder if you plan to have sex at the beginning of the evening, didn't drink, which causes irritable bowel stuff, had thought about how you were going to eat for the day, maybe you douched, got ready for it. Would you have better sex just from some of these logistical changes? And he totally did.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, and he was questioning himself, and he didn't need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, so I think before we even talk about the danger of seeking dopamine from sex, I think that, you know, another example is that I have a lot of people who are a little older, and they're like, and again, in the gay community, so more open to having more hookups and things like that. But when people realize, you know, they've worked all day and they have to work and they're tired and they have the option between jerking off to porn and getting that immediate dopamine, that rush. It's sanitized. There are no smells. I don't have to talk to people. 9 times out of 10, they'll choose doing that than taking the time throughout the week to meet, to talk to someone, to develop enough connections so they realize they're not going to be murdered if they go over and see them.
Yeah.
Getting prepared, whatever that means for them. Driving to the place, putting on an outfit that they feel good in, disrobing. Maybe then the dog comes and embarks them and licks them on the butthole. That happened to someone that they were like, well, that just threw me out of it. Because like the dog just came in and was like, well, that dog seems like it needs to be trained better.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And it just threw me out of the mood. It took me like 2 hours to like get ready and get over there. And then I went home and I didn't get anything. Why didn't I just stay home and masturbate? I think we're also facing that sex is still a natural way to get dopamine, but it's competing against all these other things that are much more immediate and have, I think, bigger dopamine releases.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to you talk, I was thinking about how sometimes I describe it for my clients as like the difference between McDonald's and going to like a 3-star Michelin restaurant. It's almost like you can't compare the two. McDonald's, you know what you're going to get pretty much before you're even there. You order it, it always tastes the same. It's easy, it's convenient. Going to a Michelin star restaurant, it's like looking at the menu, it's complicated. You've got to decide, are we going to split the hors d'oeuvres and then we're going to have starters, or are we going to get a few medium-sized dishes to share? And I don't really like that. And, oh, that's like a weird combination. I'm not sure I'm in the mood for that. Maybe we can try it. Like they're so different, aren't they? I almost feel like you can't compare the two. It's like masturbation and partnered sex are like that. And yet we often substitute partnered sex with masturbation as if it's kind of the same thing. But you don't get the same things from it.
No, and that's if someone's skilled and they're good and you know each other and you're also connected with your body. I'm not trying to get people to go to a Michelin star restaurant. I'm trying to get them to go to a Denny's.
Yeah.
To a Waffle House.
Yeah.
Because I think, and this is something I'm still formulating, one of the things, yes, learning about sex through porn is like learning about driving on the Indy 500. But also, have you ever slept with a porn star?
No. Have you?
Accidentally. I didn't.
But how? How accidentally?
Because I just slept with them, and then one day I was watching porn, and I was like, I know that tattoo.
Oh,
this was
wow.
my 20s. This was my 20s,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh. And I will say, like, what people do in porn, I mean, he was really good at sex. He was really good at sex. Watching people on porn is like comparing your sex to Olympic athletes. It's like playing a pickup basketball game and then watching people who play basketball. And so I think there are two things happening here. One is that you realize people are far more skilled at some things. Sex can be one of them than you are, right? He was so good at making me comfortable. He could, what I saw in the porn, apparently come on command. And so when you have all of these things that just work for you, your penis works, you have the muscular structure that people find desirable, you would be delusional to be insecure during sex. I mean, can you imagine enjoying your job so much that you just did it for free? Like on the side?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like he's like, I enjoy sex so much. Not only do I do it for a living, but here I am doing it on the side. I don't do therapy on the side for free.
But do you not? Maybe you do. You're just not thinking about it. Are you never put in that position, Bowen?
Yeah, but I just think about that too. Like there's this, because sex is so common, we don't think about that one, porn is not sex because they're going in with objectives and performance. There are certain things they're trying to do. They're trying to titillate you, not necessarily each other. Although you would hope they would, right? Porn does look and feel like sex. And I think people compare maybe the practice or skills they have to people who are just far more skilled. And I think we have to have an honest conversation about that too.
Yeah. And it comes back to, again, what we've been talking about this whole conversation, really, which is expectations. It's just about expectations, and we don't have anywhere really to talk about them properly, do we? Most people I mean, most people I see, so it's skewed, but I would say a lot of people don't talk about the kind of sex that they're having, so they don't really know what other people are doing. So you're going to be left alone to porn. What are you going to say?
And especially straight men.
Yeah, yeah.
There's just an information vacuum there. And then when you add things like neurodivergence, especially autism, where you've been punished for asking awkward questions, right? So sex is already the most awkward thing you can bring up next to death and taxes, right? And you have someone who feels like they're being rejected or doesn't have the social skills to have these conversations. And so they're just getting really bad information or no information at all. And so think about, right, that client that was misattributing a logistical error to self-worth. When you're isolated in a vacuum about sex and information and getting good information about it, you're pulling all kinds of narratives that don't correlate to each other, right? You're thinking, is it because of how I look? Is it because people don't desire me? Is it because I'm awkward? Maybe, but maybe not, because you're getting no good information.
Yeah. And this is where I'm thinking of, what you've talked about in your content on Instagram. You've talked about how people can use the language of kink almost as like a framework to navigate sex without necessarily having kinky sex, if that's not what they're into. Could you share a bit, like an example of what that could sound like or look like and how it could be helpful?
I think that neurotypical people, right, like when I ask you, what's your vision of like what sex is, like in popular culture?
Are you asking me now?
I'm asking you, yeah. I'm asking
Oh,
you.
right. Oh, in popular culture, it's like always starts with kissing, always kissing, and then proceeds to vaginal penetration pretty quickly. That's my view of what popular culture says about heterosex, at least.
When those things don't work for you, when none of the things that are on the conventional menu titillate you, well, you're just doing them, right? So, I've been to clubs where the first thing that happens is someone drops to their knees and starts blowing someone. There's no kissing, right? And I think what kink does is, one, because it's titillating, because it's edgy, it's like, oh, I thought I had some stuff that was weird, but that's so much more intense or bigger than I could imagine. There are people out there who are doing intense things that I couldn't imagine. Maybe what I want and need is not so big, so aberrant, so awful, right? So I think one is kink allows people who've been shamed for their wants, for their neurodivergence, for their different likings, to go, actually, there isn't just one thing to compare it to, vanilla heterosexual sex. I also think that when you have difficulties with consent, reading social cues, not because you want to take advantage of someone, but because you simply cannot read nonverbal cues. I have a friend who is part of a swingers community, and they have a lot of orgies. And because of his autism and him being open about it, they've had to have some specific cues they've started using in case someone's autistic, and what it means to actually verbalize something and not have that break the mood. Right? I think there's this thing in neurotypical sex where it's like, if I say it out loud, it kills the mood.
Yes.
And that can be true, but it can also not be true.
Yeah.
And so I think, right, in kink, because it can be so far removed from what might just accidentally happen you have to develop specific language and guidelines around what's acceptable, what's not. I was thinking a lot about, like Temple Grandin's hugging machine. I've found a few of my autistic friends really like latex or bondage. And I have to think it's because it hugs their body in a way that calms them down. And so I think when you start to realize that there are things that make your body feel good and also give you better lines of communication so you don't feel like you're hurting someone or overstepping or being the awkward person anymore, kink is powerful. And I think that's why so many people in the neurodivergent community gravitate towards it.
Yeah. That reminds me of, do you follow on Instagram, I think her Her name is like Dr. Bowen psychotherapy. She talks a lot about BDSM and ADHD, and she did her PhD on that intersection. And I think what she specifically found, I'm probably butchering it, but it was something like, for a lot of women with ADHD, BDSM helps them stay in the mood because, and like stay present, because it's so intense sensorily. It gives them enough to keep them there. Whereas if they weren't engaging in BDSM, it wouldn't work for them, which I found really fascinating.
Oh, I will look it up when we get off here.
Yeah. Okay, so wrapping up, we've only got a few more minutes. My God, I could talk to you forever. Everything you're saying is so interesting. Is there anything that you feel you really would like to clear up when it comes to sex and relationships connected to neurodivergence, or anything we've talked about here today that you think is especially important?
Find a good sex therapist if you're really worried, and just start talking about what you want.
Yeah.
I think because there are so many things that people don't understand, like objective sexuality, asexuality, ace spectrum issues, polyamory versus open relationships, swingers, I think finding trusted confidants to just start talking and demystifying these things is so important. And I think that figuring out how you focus on what makes you feel good and not rank ordering that you should be having an orgasm as opposed to having someone touch you in a way that's arousing, that somehow one of those things is better than the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can get to that closer and closer to that place of, does it feel good or not? You know, I had a client who was really struggling with feeling rejected at the bathhouse with her partner. And one of the things we've been working on is, well, why don't you go by yourself? So that you're not constantly comparing your sexual experience to your partner's sexual experience. And it's amazing how freeing when you stop comparing something that makes you feel good and being like, I really love this single scoop of vanilla ice cream. Oh, but they got a double chocolate scoop. If you didn't know that double chocolate scoop existed, you would have been so content with what happened here, right? So, you know, when I speak with people, sometimes it's like, I really enjoyed us masturbating together and we never had penetrative sex. Is there something wrong? Does he not love me? Because he couldn't ejaculate inside me? That makes me want to cry for that person so much.
Yeah.
Because again, you were having a great time. You felt connected. It felt good to you. But because of this thing that didn't happen, that's performance and expectation and culture and a message you got from somewhere, now you feel bad about the thing that could have felt really good.
Yeah. Again, expectations.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that's essential.
Ourselves, right? Yeah. My God, if I could take those expectations and rip them up, I would love to. Thank you so much for your time. How can people follow you if they want to stay up to date with what you're doing and watch all of your great content?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, at Dr. Bo Tyler. The @ DRBOTYLER.
What really stood out to me in this conversation is just how much expectations ruin sex for so many people. And I think this becomes especially important when we're talking about neurodivergence. Because if you're autistic, for example, you often learn how to understand social situations through expectations. So clear expectations can feel safe. They kind of tell you what's expected of you and how you're sort of quote unquote meant to behave, right? And also how you're meant to perform in a sexual situation. But the other side of that coin is that the more expectations we place on sex and that we bring into sex, the harder it becomes to actually figure out what you yourself enjoy, right? It becomes harder to connect to your own sexuality. And sex can then very easily shift from a moment of connection and enjoyment and pleasure into performance and into acting a certain way. And this happens in relationships without neurodivergence too. But as Bowen and I talked about, and as I very much believe, I think this kind of thing gets amplified in relationships where one or both partners has ADHD or autism. And I loved how Bowen put it, that when it's just two people in a room, belonging is all there is. And if you already feel like you don't belong, right? If you've grown up with this sense of there's something fundamentally wrong with the way I am, which unfortunately is the reality for so many people with ADHD and autism, then stepping into that really sort of intimate, vulnerable room of sex, which it is for a lot of people, can completely sort of turn things on their head. And all of those old fears or just everyday fears and expectations kind of come rushing back. Bowen and I also talked quite a bit about porn, and we talked about how porn isn't sex. And Bowen shared that they often see clients that will choose porn over partnered sex. And honestly, when you look at it, and I mean, the way we talked about it as, you know, a Denny's or a McDonald's or a Michelin star restaurant, whatever kind of analogy you go with, I think it's very clear that sex and porn are very different. And porn is very easily gratifying. It doesn't demand much from you, whereas partnered sex, on the other hand, asks a lot of you. You have to take in another person, so their wants and their needs and their desires and their boundaries. And as Bowen also pointed out, you also have to face the very real risks that exist in the world. So just as they were saying, like if you're going over to someone's place to have sex, first you need to make sure that you're not going to get murdered, right? That it's a safe person. That's not nothing. That's a big deal in and of itself. And so I think it's important to remind ourselves that conversations about porn can very quickly become judgmental. And what I really want to convey here is that it's not simple. I think there are very real reasons why we might turn to porn or masturbation over partnered sex, and that doesn't need to be vilified. That's not bad in and of itself. I don't think, even if I am a sex therapist, that we have to put partnered sex on a pedestal. But as a sex therapist, I do, of course, believe that sex is an important part of many people's relationships. And we know that it plays a big role in relational health, right? That's what the science says. But it's completely okay to sometimes choose masturbation or porn over partnered sex. I think the question to consider if you're thinking about this and wondering about your own relationship is, you know, why am I choosing this? Am I choosing this because I just want that moment alone, and masturbating or watching porn is an easy way for me to relax or enjoy myself, and I'm not always choosing it over partnered sex? Or am I choosing it and it's actually costing me or my relationship or my partner something? And I think that's where it becomes worth paying a bit of attention. We also talked about distractions during sex, and we talked about, especially when you have ADHD, how that can become even more difficult. And of course, executive functioning already takes a lot of mental energy if you have ADHD. And then sort of having sex with someone else adds this other layer. And so for many of my clients, it's not just about trying to find techniques to kind of calm the brain. It's also about asking another question, which is, do I need more novelty or do I need more intensity? And especially when we're looking at things like novelty, we know that novelty naturally helps our brain kind of focus on the present moment. And for ADHD brains in particular, this can make a huge difference. And so we often look to trying harder when something doesn't work, right? When in actual fact, we sometimes need to look at how are we shaping our sex lives and what do our sex lives require in order for presence to stick around. And I think that one of the big takeaways from our conversation overall is that we really want to try to move away from how we think sex should be to what we actually want, what makes us feel good in the moment, what makes our partner feel good in the moment, and what's most exciting and pleasurable to us. If you've enjoyed this conversation, you can follow Bowen Marshall on @DrBoTyler on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, or Threads. That's it for In Bed with Science. Please remember that everything shared in this episode is for informational purposes only and isn't a substitute for medical advice or therapy. For personal support, please reach out to a qualified professional. If you're looking to get your desire back without pressure and stress and have more and better sex, head to leanoran.com or click on the link in my show notes to learn about how you can work one-to-one with me in my online program Redesire. Thanks for listening.